Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing.
Hi, and welcome to Influence to Death. My name is Victoria LaFont.
I'm Hannah Wright, and we have a wonderful guest on the podcast today.
Yes, welcome, Jenny. Jenny McGruther. She is, I think, probably best known for Nourished Kitchen, right? Like that's
my thing. And I'm super happy to be here. I love what you guys do. So I'm eager to sit down and have some tea and chat.
Yay. Awesome. I have some yogurt. So today we are going to talk about the Weston A. Price Foundation. And I think just like to kind of just get grounded, like Jenny, you and I worked together a little bit before, through NTA.
Okay.
Maybe we keep that in and maybe we don't. It's not the focus of the podcast, but like, I know we've been in touch on social media, but I'm like, I know we've like been on videos together before.
Yeah, we collaborated on the culinary wellness module. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you. And yeah, the Weston A. Price Foundation is the focus. And I think Hannah, I actually don't even know how much you've been involved with Weston A. Price, but I know I've been heavily involved and Jenny's been heavily involved. What's your background?
I mean, when you say involved, I was a member for a while and I was part of a Chattanooga chapter. Of course, Nourishing Traditions like shaped my, foundation and nutrition before I even went to school to study nutrition science. And I was fascinated with that book from like my teenage years on. I think I mentioned that in one of our episodes. But so that's basically my association. I stopped paying dues. I stopped being part of the large organization when the whole cod liver oil and like sexual harassment stuff came to light. And I was like, nope, don't like that. And then I think I was in like a Facebook group for a local chapter. And I just wasn't like super into some of the kind of the way people treated other people, I guess, in that group, which I was I'm interested to see, Jenny, like your thoughts about that from a larger perspective of being more involved in it, because I noticed you mentioned something like that. Just kind of, if you're not going hard enough and you're not seeing the results, it's because you're not going hard enough, basically.
Right.
So,
yeah. Jenny, do you want to talk about your involvement some? And I guess I'll give mine.
Yeah. So I first came across the Weston A. Price Foundation through the mothering.com forums. They're no longer in existence, but back before there was, Facebook groups, there was a website focused on gentle parenting called mothering.com. And it had forums that were dedicated to various aspects, baby wearing, mothering a toddler, that kind of thing. And there was a section on food, and being somebody who loves food, loves to cook, I was absolutely interested in it. And they had many different subforums, one of which was traditional foods. And I was coming from a vegan vegetarian background. And so the ideas that were presented in that forum by other members, the posts, were really intriguing to me, such as the idea that meat might be good, that butter's not so bad, what else? That you can leave vegetables on the counter with salt and make sauerkraut, that as opposed to like you got to understand that we're coming from this dietary dogma of the 1990s, which was very low fat, very anti-meat, very super hygienic. So these ideas, which may seem pretty mainstream now, or somewhat mainstream, were absolutely fringe, like the fringiest you can get. And it was really interesting to me. So as somebody who always likes to challenge my own belief structure, I was like, okay, I'm coming at this from a vegan vegetarian perspective. I want to read this. I want to read more. So I read Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And that kind of like blew my mind. Meanwhile, my husband is reading the China study. And so we're having all these like lively debates. And then, and then we transitioned to like a traditional foods diet when my oldest son was about 9 months old. And that's when I started Nourish Kitchen and, started engaging in the local food scene and in traditional food pathways.
Nice.
Cool.
How old is your son now?
He's 19.
Oh my gosh. So
Wow.
it's crazy.
Oh.
That's a long time ago that you've had a lot of experience. Yeah, I remember telling people I'm going to go to school to become a Weston A. Price style nutritionist.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to do the same thing.
Yeah, I was really like excited about the NTA because of that connection.
Mhm.
And I actually think the email I got, like how I learned about NTA, was from someone through the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Mm.
It was just this random email that showed up in my inbox, but it just happened that I learned about nourishing traditions through this community that I was living in Hawaii. And it actually is the book that like I finally realized that like mold was a thing in Hawaii, because I would open Nourishing Traditions and it would smell so moldy. I mean, all the books, but I like still have this like positive association with the way that moldy things smell because of that. Like, I'm just not the genetic profile that mold messes with. Like, I don't have like problem. Maybe actually I'm like, oh, maybe that's why I've had such severe rosacea years or whatever. But I mean, maybe, but anyway, so it wasn't negative. It was really positive. But I remember reading that because we were living in a raw food community. It was sort of like this bridge between, we were primal diet, like raw meat and raw milk and like that. And it was this bridge between that and like how I grew up in Kentucky, like frying chicken and like all of the things. I mean, that's like was a staple at my house. And I was just really enamored with it. I think there was something with it that my guess is a lot of people resonate with, which it feels really nourishing. Like the aesthetics of the book, the words that are used, it feels really like comforting. Yeah. And yeah, it was like a sweetness. And especially in that community I was living in, that sweetness it wasn't as much of a part of it. It was like pretty like masculine and like work, which I have a lot of in me, but like that I was craving that, I think. And then I was actually a chapter leader in Kentucky for, I don't know, it was probably like 2 years. It was pretty short-lived just because I was ping-ponging around the United States when I was in my 20s and was never somewhere long, but was heavily involved, like going to potlucks and referring people to the chapter leaders to get food sources and going to conferences. And I remember like the huge, at one time it got scaled down eventually. I think they were like, oh my God, we can't keep doing this. But like you would go to the conferences and there would be these like it wasn't a bowl. It was like a, I don't even know what type of container, it'd be like a beautiful 5-gallon container of butter. And it was just like overflowing with butter at the beginning of like a buffet line for every meal,
Every meal.
Yeah. So yeah, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I remember seeing Sally Fallon, who is still, I believe, the executive director of the Weston A. Price Foundation, speak at like an Acres USA conference. So there was even like a tie-in to that because we were into regenerative farming and wanted to like be involved in that, side of things. So yeah, there's a lot of like crossover between like, I mean, it's food, farming, and the healing arts.
Absolutely.
That's their tagline. So yeah, I think maybe just to put some context around this episode, I like felt this a little bit coming in where I was like, I just want to shit talk them so bad. Like, I can feel that inside myself. Like I just want to like let loose, and I feel safe with you all, but I'm also like, that's not the point of this podcast. And like, if I need to do that, like I need to just like, go on a walk or something. It's like what we're really here to do is to like talk through what's happening as we see it and try and see things from as many sides as possible. So
Yeah.
I just put that out there though. Like I can feel that urge in me just to be like, I just want to like dig in. But
I have the same. So we can keep each other in check. We're trying to.
I understand. I
Yes.
understand.
Yeah. And I actually, like, even though I was really disillusioned and questioning stuff at that time, you know, with the cod liver oil, controversy, the sexual harassment, just some other things, I still was like, okay, this is great information. And it wasn't until more recently on social media that I started noticing this trend, like with all health platforms. It started to get really like cultish almost, and very exclusive, and like you have to do it this way. Seeing content that was very black and white, like something I saw actually very recently was about like raw milk and the benefits and how bad pasteurized milk is because it depletes. There's no the protein, the nutrients, like all these things, and it was a very. I was thinking of it as a mom, like looking at that information and thinking, you know, for some kids, like milk is their main source of protein because they're picky eaters or whatever. And as a mom thinking, oh, I have to get raw milk for my kid because otherwise they're not going to have enough of these nutrients. And just little things like that, that I feel like social media tends to do, where you see these like infographics recycled and the resources are very unclear, like where this is coming from. But all that said, I'll keep an open mind to Victoria. I'm trying to be like, not just dig into them too hard.
Yeah. In retrospect, or one of the things that always troubled me about the foundation was it felt to me like exchanging one dietary dogma for another. That with time, that it became, in many respects, a little cultish, and that as though it was one true way to health, for everyone, and that anytime somebody deviated, or their experiences or their health deviated from this, from the foundation's ideals, it was often seen as a personal failure. And that troubled me throughout that time, and was one of the reasons why I personally drifted away and didn't renew my membership, and it's been a while since then. But at the same time, I will say that I think that the foundation's 11 principles that they promote are generally good ones. Are generally good. I will also say that, that promise of healthy children held true in our case. Like my kid, my oldest, was raised on a Weston A. Price diet, and, he is extremely healthy. My kids never get sick. He has perfect teeth, and so the promise that they made held true in my case. But I still think that there's room in all of us to have goodness and failures, opportunities for growth and reflection and change, and also to have, some really wonderful things. Very little is black and white. And that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah.
Something I also didn't realize, probably it was more recently, and especially after reading our notes and research, is that I thought for a long time that Weston Price, like his kids or grandkids, made this foundation. I thought him and his family were somehow involved. I had no idea that this one individual, I guess mostly Sally Fallon, was kind of like the person who created this. And, that was it. That was the organization. I had no clue, because so much is talked about his work and it's all based on his work. And I really want to talk about that in this, like how much of that is aligned? Like, is it really aligned, or has it mutated into something else? And where is that coming from? Like, who is creating that? What's it based on? But I was kind of just like whoa, I didn't realize the whole time I was so enamored with this lifestyle and way, it was not coming from the researcher and kind of pioneering person that I thought.
Right.
And it's not like they really, I guess, mislead you. It's never really said. It just kind of, you kind of think it is. You kind of think he's the one that made this happen. I mean, I know he passed away like way a long time ago in like, the 40s or 60s or something, but so that doesn't make sense time-wise, of course, but it was kind of just logically where my brain went, because everything talks about him. It's called the Weston A. Price Foundation. I just wanted to put that in there in case anyone listening kind of thought the same thing as me.
Just to clarify, so Weston A. Price, the man, was born on September 6th, 1870, and he died January 23rd, 1948, at 77 years old. Weston Andrew Velo Price. And he was a Canadian dentist. So if people aren't familiar with this guy, I'm so steeped in this that I didn't even think for this episode, if people hadn't heard of the Weston A. Price Foundation, they would be like, what the hell are you talking about? It might be a good idea just to give them an overview. And then Hannah, to your point, to give a history of the actual organization.
Yeah.
Ginny, do you want to kind of just give an overview of Weston Price, and then we can talk about the history?
Yeah. The foundation or the man?
Man, yeah. I think actually you probably, all of us, know the most about him and his work.
Weston Price was a dentist in the 20s and 30s and in the early 20th century. And in his practice, he kept seeing all of these children, specifically children, adults too, but mostly children, come in, and they were very young and their teeth were riddled with cavities, just riddled with cavities. And he's trying to remember back to his earliest days of practicing dentistry, right? And he remembers that, 10, 20 years earlier, the kids had healthy teeth when they came to the dentist for the first time, that it was unusual to have a cavity, let alone multiple cavities. And so he reflects on this and is like, well, why is everybody struggling with their dental health? And, as a dentist, he knows that dental health and systemic health, like your whole health, they're related. This is also, he's working at the time when nutritional sciences was at its infancy. We're just discovering things like, vitamin C and how it works, So intrigued by all of this and trying to find the answer to why all of these kids' teeth are riddled with cavities, he decides to go back and say, and tour the world and try to find societies that have limited contact with the industrialized world, okay? So that they're reliant upon the traditional foods that have nourished generation and generation. So he goes to all of these places. He goes to the isolated Hebrides Islands, in Scotland, and he looks and he sees that the people who are reliant upon their traditional foods, which I think in Scotland, in the Hebrides, it was things like cod and oatmeal and, cod head soup and seaweed and things like that. Those people had excellent teeth. They had room for all their teeth because their jaws were developed so that they could allow the wisdom teeth to come in without crowding. It was rare to find a cavity, but the same people who maybe lived in a port town closer to the mainland and were reliant on white flour, white sugar, and more processed foods had very little room for all their teeth and were riddled with cavities. So then he also went to Switzerland, and what did the isolated Swiss people in the Lüwenschal Valley? They ate butter and milk products and sourdough bread. And he went to the South Pacific. He went to isolated parts of Africa. He went up to isolated parts of Alaska, and he traveled all around trying to analyze the dietary difference between people who had access to modern foods and people who adhered to their traditional foods. And throughout that process, he found that those who adhered to their traditional foods had better dental health. In addition, he would go and he would analyze like the mineral content of various foods and found that certain foods were much higher in minerals, and that those correlated to better dental health. And so he advocated for a diet that was mineral dense, and more importantly, he just cataloged everything, and he wrote this book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and that is who Weston Price is, and that's what he did. And it's really okay. The book is a sleeper. Like you could follow it. That's why I read it. It was great for reading before I went to bed because it's so dry. But it's worth reading because it's really interesting to review his observations.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you don't know.
The photos are really cool to see.
Compelling.
Because a lot of times he also, I remember he would compare kids in the same family, in like the port towns or like the cities. And some kids, their food preferences were kind of still more the traditional family foods, and other kids were more into candy and, condensed milk and stuff like that, and took pictures of their teeth to kind of like see those differences. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It is.
It's, you know what I always remember from like the photos, I'll try to find a photo to put in the show notes, that his wife Florence came with him. I don't know about on all of his trips, but on a lot of them. And there's photos of her in like full fur and like heels on like a glacier, like he's out there in like Sunday best, like hanging out with people on the ice and like heels. They went out there. They like really traveled to check this out. Okay, so that's great to have like a baseline for people to understand who Weston Price is. And then I pulled up an interview that Sally Fallon, who is now the executive director of the Weston A. Price Foundation, did. The woman's name is Kelly Mogenborg, but she goes online by Kelly the Kitchen Cop. She did so Sally's speaking, like telling the story of the Weston A. Price Foundation. So it felt really nice to just like have the story kind of like from the person who founded it. And we'll link to the interview. So Sally describes kind of her childhood and like how she grew up eating, and that she was really into food and cooking. It was actually like hilarious. It was just like I've met Sally. I don't know her at all. I've just met her briefly, like seen her speak and like that. But like, I felt like it like kind of spoke a little bit to her personality, where in this interview, she criticizes Julia Child's cookbooks. And I was like, one of the greatest, like culinary, like figures of our time, who just like loved butter, also like shared interests. She's like got this little bit of a beef with Julia Child. Anyway, I thought that
was a weird part in there. I mean, it's a 15-minute interview if anybody wants to listen to it, but she was basically saying I could do it better than Julia Child. I was like, all right.
Yeah, like, whoa, okay. But, whatever you think. So yeah, it was in 1990. She was talking with a friend who wanted to write a cookbook with her. And Sally was like, if I write one, I want to have it incorporated with, these more like traditional kind of findings of Weston Price. Like I would love to do a combination. So, that's been 34 years ago. Yes. Okay.
Yep.
I had this moment of like, I'm not going to do this math right. So she had the idea. And then the first edition of Nourishing Traditions came out in 1996. And the second edition in 1999. And that's that book that Hannah held up. And then around that time, like in the mid 90s, she met Dr. Mary Enig. I believe Dr. Enig's PhD like is in like lipid physiology. Like, yeah. So Sally Fallon wrote to Mary Enig to say like, hey, I'm writing this cookbook, but I'm not a scientist. Actually, Sally's background is in English. That's like what her degrees are in. It's like English literature. And so in the interview, she describes Mary Enig as like, hey, you're on the right track, but like, yeah, come over and let me like talk to you about the science. Just as an aside, like one of the like tomes of the Weston A. Price Foundation is Mary Enig's book, Know Your Fats. And I actually love that book and still check it out a lot because she is just like, here's what is. Like,
Mhm.
it was one of the first books I read about diet where it wasn't slanted. She's
Yep.
not like, this is bad, this is good. She's just like, here's the chemical structure. As far as I remember, maybe you all have found other things in that book, but like, she's just like, here's the deal with fats. These are poly, these are, like saturated. Here's here's the description. Here's the nutrient value. There's like no like good or bad. I loved that when I read it. I used it as a reference book for a long time. But they work together. And Mary Enig is a co-author on Nourishing Traditions, right?
Yep, she is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So she started working together. They started working together. At the time, Sally was living in DC. And she actually, in the interview, talks about how she goes to the Library of Congress, which I feel like is this like big, like, it's like not a regular library. She like goes to the Library of Congress, and like in the Library of Congress, she finds these documents on soy and these meetings that have been conducted on soy foods. And it like tells the truth about how they're going to like market soy foods. And there's all these toxins, but they have to figure out how to like in the way she's describing it, like how to work around these toxins so we can like market it to people. And in the interview, Kelly is like, oh, that would be great information to put on your website. And Sally's like, yeah, we have those files. We just need to like scan them and put them on the website. And I'm like, I want to see.
I want to see too.
Yeah, totally. Like,
Show it up to me.
What is the truth about soy? I feel like I keep asking myself, what is the truth about soy? Which is this huge, like, it's like a saying almost in the Weston A. Price Foundation, like the truth about soy.
Right.
Like, we're going to give you the real truth about soy. So initially, Sally Fallon was on the board of this other organization that's dedicated to Weston A. Price's work called the Price Pottinger Foundation. And Francis Pottinger was another scientist around that time who did, his work was different, but like in the same vein as Weston A. Price. And we don't need to go into fully who Francis Pottinger was, but she was on the board of this other organization, but felt like that they weren't as active as she wanted them to be. And so she left. And she formed the Weston A. Price Foundation instead. And that was in 2000. So it's actually, as I was listening to this interview, I was like, yeah, it's a lot more recent than I
didn't
thought.
realize that.
Yeah.
Because I guess I started kind of getting into it in like 2005-ish. That was really new. And I assumed it had been around since like the 60s or, for a good while.
No.
Since Weston Price was born.
Exactly. I really did. I thought that. Silly me.
I will say this. In the interview, Sally was very complimentary of the staff of the Weston A. Price Foundation and like the people that she worked with. Like she seemed like very like charitable is not the right word, but just, yeah, like very like gracious and like that about the people that she worked with. But yeah, they had their first journal and their first conference in 2000. And Jenny, you were saying, you thought there was like in a church basement, and you're totally right. The conference was held in a church basement. They would have meetings in this church basement, and then it just grew from there. So now in the Weston A. Price Foundation, I want to say there's like 13,000 members.
Wow.
So I'm going to double check myself. I think that's right, but
yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, 13,000 and over 300 local chapters. It's not enormous, but I think the reason why it is worthwhile to have an episode on is because in the world of integrative wellness and like functional medicine, like, holistic nutrition, all of that, it's like very well known in our world. And I think there are all of these ideas that have kind of filtered down through the Weston A. Price Foundation, especially with like a lot of us came in to this world through that door. And it's kind of like, well, what is true and what's not true? And what's the impact that organization kind of still has on some people today?
Absolutely. I think that it's only 13,000 people out of a country of, however many hundreds of millions. But if you really look at their impact, the fact that you can go to your local grocery store and get kombucha, or there are so many bone broth brands now, or, grass-fed butter is accessible, and pasture-raised eggs are accessible, like in Walmart, I think has a lot to do with the foundation's work. even though that connection may not be so apparent, because they were highly influential in the wellness community, especially early on, and it did have a filtering effect that I think is lingering in the health and wellness community overall. It's really interesting to over 20 years or however long it's been since I was involved or started to get to know the foundation, to see that long-lasting effect has been pretty profound. Their impact is, and their influence is profound.
Yeah,
it is. I've never thought about it like that. And that's incredible, really. Like the fact, if that influence has like done that and made those things more mainstream and accessible for people just by it being trendy. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, actually, it's Sally Fallon worked with the guy who created the primal diet, the raw food diet I was eating, Agenus von der Planets. We've talked about him on past episodes. They worked together to push raw milk legality in California. So I forget about them like joining forces somehow. But yeah, they're the reason that raw milk, I mean, my guess is that it was like the California effect. Like it started in California and then it spread to other states. And like, for instance, you can get raw milk in the stores. But yeah, that was Sally Fallon. So usually Jenny, we'll like talk about the history and then we'll talk about our bias around the topic, which is, I feel like, where like, probably the most robust part of our conversation will go today. But then we also have some research that we have pulled up. I mean, we have a whole episode on soy with one of the coolest dudes. Dr. Marcolina. So people will be able to access that around soy foods and what the literature says about that. I think we've done our due diligence there, but yeah, we have some studies pulled on some other factors that the foundation promotes.
I wanted to add something because you said something about soy, like the truth about soy and how that's really like kind of how their message is around soy. But I feel like it's around a lot of things. At least that's how I absorbed it. I mean, in the book, Nourishing Traditions, like the different like chapter heads and asides are a lot about like learn the truth about this and this is what they want you to think, but this is what's real and it's very eye-opening for someone who's never thought about food that way or asked those questions, especially if you are coming from like a standard Western type diet or whatever, something where you're restricting like animal fats or protein, animal protein, and kind of like showing you it's empowering, I guess. And I feel like that is what like draws people in. But what I'm interested in with this episode learning is how like they're kind of I don't know how to say it eloquently. I mean, it ends up being not empowering, I guess, at the end of the day for the people involved. You know what I mean? I mean, it's kind of because it's so strict and that cultish side, I feel like takes the power away from the people it's trying to help, I guess, what I'm trying to say.
Like you're not autonomous anymore. You're like a Weston A. Pricer.
Right. Yes. And like, it's great to ask questions and question things and like be a food rebel unless it's questioning the stuff that we're saying. And then you can't question it because we know it's right. And that obviously with our podcast, like that is like our theme a lot of the time in each episode. So,
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that assessment. I think for a lot of people, like you said, there's this appeal to this hidden knowledge. Now now you know something that other people don't know. You have this hidden knowledge. You know the truth. And that is a very effective tool to give people this sense of hidden knowledge, or that you've been lied to by the food industry your whole life. You've been lied to by the doctors. But here, let me give you the truth. And so it creates this really insular community. And I think that is one of the greatest flaws of the foundation, is that in its attempt to enlighten the public about some things that probably should be talked about, the heavy dose of ultra processed foods and how that's not so great for people, it also feeds another sense of private, hidden, cryptic knowledge. And so people then, in my experience working with the chapters, going to like almost every conference up until, the cod liver oil scandal, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. There was always a sense of, what is it? Could it be superiority almost? A sense of like cultish superiority that we have this hidden knowledge, we have this secret. And it really leads to problems if you find that those dietary guidelines aren't working for you, or if you're sick. And sometimes, despite all your best efforts, you can still become sick, or your kids can become sick.
Yeah.
And then chapter leaders will sit there and, tell you, well, are you doing it enough? Are you good enough? Are you adhering enough to this? We say that, are you, you're doing raw milk? Well, I'm still intolerant of raw milk. Well, are they getting supplemented with soy? And so there you go on this rabbit hole where you can never be good enough if you're having problems. And I think that is, for me, one of the biggest reasons why I began to distance myself and I began to pull away from the foundation after having been deeply involved and a great big advocate for its work.
Yeah, I think the way that, would you say that this is what aligns with you is like how you call it, like the one true God complex?
Yeah. Yes, I loved reading what you wrote there, Jenny, because that was what I was trying to describe to myself, like why I would, my local chapter, like what is it that I'm like not vibing with, and I really am getting a bad taste in my mouth from this, and yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah,
go ahead.
It's just wild. There are so many instances that I can think of in my experience. I remember sitting down at a conference, and like you go into these conferences and it's beautiful food, grass-fed meat and tubs, like literal tubs of butter, and all these beautiful fermented foods. Beautiful food, farm fresh foods. And I'm sitting there talking, and I happen to mention like that I think vegetables, this is going to sound silly, but I happen to mention to somebody that I think vegetables are foundational to health. Every single one at that table is like, no, we don't. Kids don't need the vegetables. It's fats that are foundational to health. Because I thought that was a fairly innocuous thing to say, is that like, hey, plants are good. Even that was too beyond the pale from the foundation, not the foundation's guidelines as they are written, but as they are interpreted by its biggest advocates.
Right. Yeah.
It sounds silly.
Interpretation is key. It's fun. That's a great illustration of how all that works. What did you say? A cultish superiority. It's like, like, how dare you mention vegetables? Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty wild. Or I remember, walking with my child out of the conference one time, and, the foundation and Dr. Price's work also pays a lot of attention to facial structure, facial symmetry, the wideness of the palate, because it's just part of what they do, and that facial symmetry and the wideness of the palate is indicative of health. If you look at the foundation's work. And I remember walking through a conference one day, and a woman yelled across this like huge hotel room at my child, "Look at him! He has such a big round head. That's a child that grew up on raw milk." This is so wacky. It was just extreme, I guess. And I tend to be more of a middle of the road kind of person. I get that was a compliment, by the way. So
yeah, totally. That's a huge compliment.
But it was still strange, and so they look for confirmation everywhere. And if it's working, it's confirmation that the diet is correct and the guidelines and the interpretation of the group is correct. And if it's not working, then it's because there's something wrong with your process. Your mother wasn't nourished enough when she was pregnant with you. Maybe the eggs that you get from your local farmer the hens are supplemented with a little soy, there's this desire to seek perfection. And I think that can be hard. I think that can be hard on the community itself.
Yeah, it's kind of very competitive. I feel like it starts pitting people against each other a little bit. Like who's doing it better? I don't know. Yeah. I very much see what you're saying, and it's nice to hear someone else notice the same things that I noticed that were bothering me and still do, especially when I see other nutrition professionals. I mean, people who have, a dietetics license or a master's in nutrition who are very much still Weston A pricers, and they're really in that and pushing that to their clients and their community, and it embodies that, like, you have to be perfect otherwise. Otherwise your children, your grandchildren will suffer and it will be your fault.
That is a lot of pressure.
Yeah. It's totally unattainable too. It's absurd, but it's like, it reminds me too of medical medium, honestly. It's a very similar, you've been lied to, we have the truth, got to do it this way, otherwise you fail. Yeah. Straight to hell. Just kidding. But like
there that aspect is there. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm like very susceptible to the like go hard. Like I'm like, I'll go as hard as you can go. I will eat all the fish eggs. I will eat all the cod liver, And Hannah and I have had that discussion before where she's like doesn't have, she's like repelled by that a little bit. And I'm like, I'll just like dive right in. So it's like interesting to me to see like you all having like your subtlety red flag, be like, I'm not sure about this. And I'm just like, yeah, what are those chickens eating? I remember being so bought in to that. And not like, my starting to question was really like when all of the like cod liver oil stuff started. I mean, I had like a feeling of like, really, with some of the teachings, but that was the hinge for me. And so it's interesting. I didn't have it really come up very strongly until then. So, it's like going to be different for different people, I guess. But now looking back, I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, it's like there is such an extreme pressure, sort of like a cult-like feeling around that is not middle of the road. And I can still feel that effect in me. Like drinking pasteurized milk is still to this day a little like, like, or drinking soy milk, which I drink almost every day. It's like some of the tenets of the foundation are still so deep in me, even though like I have a lot of proof that they're not like perfect recommendations. It really like imprinted.
Same, especially as a mom too. Like,
yes.
I had this plan. I was like, my child is going to be a nourishing traditions baby, and I'm going to make, do everything by the book. And then I became a mom and I was like, nope, this isn't, and whatever. But he is an extremely healthy kid. But I have those inklings where, if something isn't right or he's sick, or I'm like, oh my God, is it because he had some ultra processed food, last week? I don't know. Like it's still, it's very silly, but it definitely kind of like gets a hold of your brain and is in there affecting all of how you're perceiving things, your emotions around food. Yeah. Do we want to talk about go right into raw milk or the cod liver oil? I know that those are two big points. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like, I think people are probably pretty clear on our bias, but just to say like now, like looking back, like I was involved with the Weston A Price Foundation from the time I was like, in some way, like 21 years old, over 20 years, I've known about them and been involved with them. Now knowing what I know, I'm like, oh gosh, like I can see these holes and like that. And I have this bias where I'm like, why would you promote a dietary pattern in this way. So, and it comes up in all of these episodes that we do, Jenny, where it's like, there's like good in there. There's like a seed of truth, or there's like a seed of like helpfulness, or like a lot of benefit, but then it's like surrounded by all of this like crap.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that in some ways, yes, in some ways, no, with the Weston A. Price Foundation, where I'm like, my guess is like it's net positive. Like people now have access to like kombucha and have awareness of like better farming practices and like that. But yeah, my bias is like, if you have influence, even if it's 13,000 people and the people around them, why not use it for balance and kind of to talk to them? I almost think like to talk to them like adults versus like the rules and you're going to follow the rules. And then also in just a way that like, in my opinion, is very biased based on what we know from not just solid research, but from like clinical experience. It's like the ideas that they promote are very skewed. So that's like that's a hard sell, where it's like, it's not all bad, but there are some parts that are so imbalanced. It's all wrapped up in one package. And then personally, I'm just like, I've had moments of just being like so disgusted that I don't even think about them anymore. You know, it's almost like a joke to me now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from in this episode. And like I said, I'm like trying to do my best not to be a shit about it or like, you know, be really down on them, but it's hard.
Yeah. I understand.
Yeah, I feel the same. Very similar. I'm very curious on where, like you said, why does it have to be so extreme? Like where is that coming from? You know, now knowing that it's not really solely founded on Weston Price's like observations. I'm like, where are you getting this stuff? Like the fermented cod liver oil, that's not anything he ever talked about. And the company that sells that cod liver oil, they used to sell regular fresh cod liver oil. Like, why did they start leaving it in vats to ferment? Like, who dreamed that up? Like, I don't understand. And what is the point of that? You know, is it just to make money? Like, is it to retain that isolated community because you're basically selling them something that is like this healing thing, you know, that they have to have? I don't know. That's kind of where my head's at. I feel like there's some kind of motivation to make it the way it is, because, like you said, there's so many beautiful and nourishing, you know, methods and points that the Weston A. Price Foundation, you know, puts out there. It's like, why do you have to go make it weird and go so hard? You know, why? So if y'all know the answer to that, I would love to hear it.
So, you know, I want to underscore, and I can only speak from my experience, but I think that most of the people who are involved with the foundation at that level are true believers. I was a true believer. Like, I really was. I attended all the conferences. I lived in a rural community, so our chapter was very, very small, but we went and we, you know, did our potlucks, and I, you know, attended the conferences. I promoted the conferences. They ask a lot of their volunteers, and it's part of when you are asked to do something, you know, and this has been told to me by other people, if Sally asks you to do something, you absolutely say yes. So it's about being part of this tight community. And when you find a community as a human being in an increasingly socially isolated world, it feels good. And so I would say that the people, everyone I knew was a true believer. I was, and then I started seeing signs here and there and there and there, and then finally I was like, okay, I need to pull. I can't deny it anymore that I need to pull away. To answer your question about the FCLO, you were correct. Green Pastures did originally produce like a regular cod liver oil. I think it was like blue ice cod liver oil or something like that. It was just a regular cod liver oil. And then it was off the market for a good long while, and everybody in the foundation was upset because you have to get your cod liver oil every day and you have to have the right brand, you know, because we can't trust the industry to produce, you know, we can't trust the industry to produce the right brand. So the right cod liver oil. So you have to get it from the foundation approved supplier. And they went off the market for a while. And when they came back to market, it was fermented cod liver oil. You are correct that Price never talked about fermented cod liver oil. The closest thing that he came to talking about would have been like a solar activated cod liver oil. That's the closest, where he like put a little cod liver oil in the sun and for a little bit, and felt that like it was being solar activated. And that even then he felt that, if I'm remembering what I read correctly, that taking a little bit gave him a headache, and that's all I really remember. And so the idea of this fermented cod liver oil is not in his work. And I think that when you really start comparing a lot of what the foundation says directly against Weston Price's work, you're going to see discrepancies. Mm-hmm. Because it's like Weston A. Price is part of that basis for the foundation's work, but then there's so much on top of that. There's homeopathy, there is the anti-soy, there is discussion of vaccines, there is, and also you talked about, being a mother and wanting to raise a nourishing traditions baby. There's very like rigid guidelines for raising children within
there's a whole book, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Lifestyle.
Yeah. I actually bought that book, I think, for one of my first friends who had a baby when we were younger. And now I'm like, oh crap, did I give that book to her?
It was probably good in a lot of ways, and I just wanted to like point this out, because I'm also thinking if people are listening to this and they're not super familiar with this community, they're going to be like, what the f is up with the cod liver oil? So
right.
It's like, to us, I'm like, it's so natural. I actually, y'all, God, I am a total like a mark for stuff like this. I like would order the cod liver oil I think it came in like a gallon size. You could get like this like really big container, and there would be like caramel flavor and vanilla. There were like these different flavors. And so we had a small nutrition practice in Northern California with there was like a retail side, so people could buy supplements and herbs or whatever, and we would sell it there. And then if it wouldn't sell, by the expiration date, we would take it off the shelf, and I would take it home. And I remember taking like just massaging my body with it, like taking bath, because I was like, it's going to go bad. And it's probably good for me. I would just like rub it everywhere and like get in the hot bath. This like stink.
You smell
terrible. But I was like, it's so high in vitamin A and vitamin D. Okay. And so that's the deal. It's a traditional source. It's a cod, fish, liver, true liver, the oil from that. And it's a traditional food that people would use, I think, mainly to get vitamins A and D.
Yes.
The thing for that. Anyway, I was totally bought into it and took it, and God, probably took too much of it, knowing like you can have too much vitamin A and you can have too much vitamin D, those fat soluble vitamins. But I just want people to understand, like, cod liver oil as a thing was is a thing that people take. It was a huge emphasis for the Weston A. Price Foundation. And then it kind of turned into this like fermented product and question mark why.
The fermented product, like, let's just be honest, like, it tastes vile. It's a vile flavor, and it was hard for people to swallow because it was unpleasant to taste for most people. I'm sure some people were like, oh yeah, I love it, to each their own. But I remember, like, in my heyday of all having to go so hard, because I did, I was all in, and I tried to, and I really wanted my child to take this fermented cod liver oil because the foundation said that this is how you make healthy children. And I wanted my child to be healthy. And he was absolutely not into it. Like I said, it was pretty foul. And no matter, like, there was the caramel flavor, there was the orange flavor. No, I had this idea. Okay, I'm going to go hard enough. I'm going to make homemade cod liver oil. homemade cod liver oil gummies. Like, that's how hard it was. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make them with gelatin. Yay, because I've got all that
Yeah.
collagen protein. I'm going to make it with honey for a natural sweetener. I'm going to make it with cod liver oil. Like, and I think back to that, I'm like, you were way in over your head on that one. Like, what were you thinking? What were you thinking?
At least you didn't use it as a bath oil, sis.
That is like, I'm impressed. That's commitment. I mean, I took the fermented stuff for a while. My mom would buy it because she also was very influenced by Weston A. Price Foundation, and it's nasty. It's really bad, and I guess that's why they flavor it. And I grew up on regular cod liver oil, just like Carlson or whatever. So I was used to taking it, and so I think I could handle it. And now, we have cod liver oil in our fridge. I use the Rosita's cod liver oil, and I was amazed, and I'm not affiliated with them at all, but I was amazed at how pleasant it tasted compared to, like, it's tolerable. When my son was 1 and 2, he would just drink it. Like, he was totally fine with it. I can't imagine what he would have said to the fermented stuff. I'm sure he would have been like, absolutely not. Because it's like your body's telling you, I'm not supposed to eat this.
Yeah.
It's like your natural, innate knowledge, like, don't eat this. This is bad, because, we can put all these links in because Kayla Daniels did a really great, like, multiple write-ups on this, the fermented cod liver oil, and how, I don't know what y'all think, but it's not supposed to be fermented oil. It's not like fermenting cabbage or, kimchi or kombucha. It's not the same thing. It's almost like putrefied, and it's
rancid.
It's rancid. And so I'm just curious, like, why, I guess there's not an answer for it, like, where that idea came from. And I have to go to, like, financial benefit. And I'm thinking about how, they found out that it was actually pollock oil and not cod liver. And maybe that's much less expensive, but maybe it's not good quality. And then if you just let it sit out in a tub in your backyard, it would taste so bad you couldn't even tell it was bad quality in the first place. And then you could sell it for even more because it has all these claims that it's even better because it's fermented. And it's all just kind of made up. And yeah, I'm just kind of assuming and wondering. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, and to clarify, like, this was my take on what happened, is they were selling this fermented cod liver oil for years. And then, this nutritionist, Dr. Kayla, is it Daniel or Daniels?
Daniel.
Okay.
He was on the board of the Weston A. Price Foundation.
Vice president.
Very established within the organization, and had some misgivings, and eventually published. We'll attach the PDF. I couldn't believe I found the link is still published. She published this. It's like many paged PDF called Hook, Line, and Stinker. So it's this like huge report on her, basically her reasons why she thought that this was detrimental. And, when nobody would, I guess, like, kind of hear what she had to say, when she was verbally expressing this, she published this. And so the PDF is totally still out there. It's still available. You can read it. So she goes through and is like, here's the problems with this. I think this is actually harming people. Split from the Weston A. Price Foundation. And when that happened, I think that was probably a breaking point for a lot of people. The problem that occurred is, like, she had her findings, the Weston A. Price Foundation had their findings and their opinions. There were these two camps, and there was no, in my opinion, there was no respect for the people in the middle, just like the regular ass people who had just been spending a lot of money taking people's word for it. The foundation was just like, she's a kook. At least in my opinion, she had some points she laid out. And then all these people were left in the middle, kind of like, well, what do we do? And also maybe concerned about their health, because such an emphasis had been put on this perfection in what you eat for so long. And then there's this, person who was so affiliated with the Weston A. Price Foundation saying like, hey, actually this might be detrimental. And I want to say like, I can't remember if it was directly or indirectly even like linked to that possibly, was it Dr. Ron Swan, what's his name? Dr. Ron Schmidt, had died of like cardiovascular disease, and that it was somehow associated with this fermented cod liver oil, which, we're talking about was for all intents and purposes rancid. It was this whole controversy, and it was handled so poorly in respect to the people who are the members. That's when I was like, these people are kooks. Like, it's just so much disrespect. And I actually remember not renewing my membership, and they had this little box that was like, why didn't you renew? And I was like, I have no respect for you at this point, because there's so many people who have these huge question marks that you're not doing anything to, like, you're not taking care of your people. So that's my take on that story. And I'd be maybe missing some details if people want to fill in the blanks.
I had many, before Kayla Daniel released her report, I had concerns. There were grumblings and discussions about the possibility of rancidity in the fermented cod liver oil for about a year, maybe a little longer. And I remember having like I talked about like saying I think vegetables are pretty awesome and being hushed about that. So imagine saying, I think this fermented cod liver oil might be rancid. So people were having these like hush conversations around the Weston A. Price conference the previous year, and it was like you felt very rebellious. Like you felt it was extremely hush. It was extremely hush hush, but there were grumblings and concerns being raised by people within the foundation prior to Kayla Daniels' report. I remember when Kayla was doing her report, because she and I actually had a conversation, because I had written a little bit about cod liver oil, and I said that I had concerns about rancidity. It was like one comment on somebody's blog, I don't even remember where, and she happened to see it, and so we started a conversation before she had released her report, and we talked about it, and it was troubling, some of the things that she told me about the climate within the board of directors, and how she was trying to bring this up and was hushed time and time again. And here she's the vice president. She and Sally had co-authored a book together called the Nourishing Broths, I think was their book that they had done together. And she was integral in that foundation. She was a huge supporter of it. And so it was troubling for her to not have these concerns be addressed when she tried to work within the channels she had. So I remember when it came out, and talking with her a lot around the time she released the report. And I just want to underscore that she did so at great personal risk. It's a lot easier to keep your mouth shut and just nod along. And Kayla Daniel knew that was going to be an inflammatory report, and she felt she had no other choice other than, because she was not getting these questions answered when she went through the foundation's channels. But she did so at personal risk. Her social community, like I said, WAF is a very insular community. Her social community was linked to the foundation. Her income was linked to the foundation. Again, remember that she and Sally co-authored a book. I want to say, I could be wrong, that her book, The Whole Soy Story, was also published by New Trends Publishing. I could be wrong about that. But her income, her social life, they were all linked within the foundation. So for her to release a report that was contrary to what the foundation wanted meant risking those relationships and potentially her finances as well. She paid for the testing, I believe, primarily on her own.
She sent it to 5 different labs. I'm sure it was expensive.
Extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And lipid testing, like testing for rancidity, rancidity isn't something you're like, okay, it's present or it's not. And I'm not a lipid scientist, but from my understanding is that there's this long process where certain markers peak at certain points during the putrefaction process. And so testing for rancidity is tricky. But I want to underscore like what a great risk it was for her to even release that report.
Yeah, I was very impressed when that happened and just proud of her. I don't know her, but I just thought, wow, like that is incredible. I mean, it was a great risk for her and she did it. And I'm sure it just made her life very difficult, but she did it anyways, because I guess because she just knew she had to, because she knew, had these questions and she got them confirmed. And then it's like, got to tell people, that this could be harming you. And I mean, people still use that product, right? Do they still recommend it or not?
Yes.
They still recommend it. Oh, wow. Yes.
They also, subsequent to that, the foundation, this upset a lot of the other sponsors of the foundation at that time as well. For example, people were pretty upset, because it wasn't it wasn't only a question about whether or not the product is healthy. It was also a question about, you say it's cod and it's pollock, right. And so for an organization that spends so much time focusing on sourcing and quality, that felt to a great many people like a betrayal. And I know that they lost sponsors as a result of that. I believe that it was Vital Choice was one who pulled out of their conference. Vital Choice, for those who aren't familiar, sells seafood. So they are intimately connected with the Alaska seafood industry. And so they pulled out, and it was a fiasco.
Yeah. It was interesting to be in like the chapter Facebook groups or the main groups, just like hearing like people just flipping out. Like, what is this? What is this? And like you said, Vic, like all those people are really affected the most because they're like, man, I've spent $2,000 on my stock of fermented cod liver oil. I've been giving it to my baby. Yeah. And my husband, who has cardiovascular, early cardiovascular disease, and like, have I been hurting them? Like, and still there's no clear, there is clear answer, but there's no clear answer from the organization promoting it. Right. They're just going to brush it under the rug. Yeah.
That was so unacceptable to me. Like, you need to come with something, and nothing ever came. Is there, if we do have to cut it to, end in 10 minutes or so, is there anything that you really want to highlight or touch on?
Gosh,
there's so much.
It's hard because I was involved for so long. And there's just so much. I do think that it's worthwhile to talk about raw milk. I do think that's worthwhile. And I have, personally mixed feelings on that issue. I think the biggest flaw in the foundation is the fact that they believe themselves to be, or they believe their guidelines to be, infallible. Right. And when nothing can be questioned, that creates problems. Everything should be questioned, and we should be able to reevaluate. The only time I've ever seen them reevaluate and reverse a stance on something was on bone broth, actually, which was, bone broth is, they said, like in Sally's books and, and broth is beautiful in all their articles, that it's a great source of minerals. It's not. Right. And finally, they reversed their stance on that, where they said, we used to think this, but now we know different. And that was the only time that I have ever seen a shift. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. I didn't realize that. That's interesting. And when you say that, I see people still share like how to get in minerals, and bone broth is always like one of those top foods. And in my mind, I'm like, is it a good source of minerals? And I remember researching it and looking at it. I was like, it's not. Like, where's this information coming from?
Yeah, it's the vegetables that are in the broth, right? Yep. That provide the minerals.
Yeah. And even then, it's not really all that much. You would do better like eating a plate of vegetables than sipping a broth, having been
that, Jenny. What I wanted to ask is, can we meet again and keep talking? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Because I feel like there's so much. I have more I want to talk about also.
I mean, until I saw all of your notes, Jenny, I was like, okay, olive oil, raw milk. But now all these other great points you've brought up, like, it's so important.
I really want to talk about like that Nina Plank, the Nina Plank review, because I think it really illustrates a lot of what's wrong with the foundation.
Okay.
You know, the fact that you could have the balls to say, well, maybe instead of, you know, going on antidepressants, depressed mothers should just eat more bone broth and egg yolks. Like, that's a big what the fuck for me. It makes me kind of angry. That's what I mean when I say, like, you have to be, you follow things perfectly. And if you don't, and if you experience a problem, there must be some flaw within you, because this is perfect. This diet gives you perfect health.
Right. And when you vilified the other solutions that are out there, then there's only one place to turn.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. It's an article that Sarah Russell would give it to her clients. It's like, moms don't cry. That might've been it. I should ask her for it, but it's essentially like, it's the account of this woman who is like, I'm going to do everything right. Like, you know, every single thing right. And then her baby, actually, they found out, you know, they did like testing or like that as the pregnancy went on, there was an issue. And it's like her grappling with the fact that like she did everything that you're supposed to do. And then like, what did she do wrong? And I think she finally did come to the realization of like, you can do every single thing right. But like the bottom line that no foundation, or it's not because they're a foundation, but it's like any organization with like cult-like qualities is never going to touch on is like, you're essentially like trying to put promises on a chemistry set that has an infinite number of reactions happening every second. And that reality is never discussed. It's like, you can't put a promise on that. There's no promise. The actual reality is from evolution. Things go awry and in different directions all the time that don't make any sense to us with the perspective that we have, because we don't see overarching. It is just how it goes. You know, women died in childbirth constantly. Babies died in childbirth constantly. It's just like, you know, it's rough. And I think like part of this that dovetails into it is like the noble savage, you know, perfect life of the like traditional person. It's like, no. Shit was fucked. You know, and we have a lot of like technology that has like brought us to this point where we can like idealize it now. So there's like all of this that's like mixed into it. It's like, yeah, it's wild to see that, and then to actually know what the reality was, and to know like you can only influence this with your diet or your lifestyle or your mindset so much, and then it's random.
Yeah.
Oh, this just made me think, if we have another episode, I would love to talk about the parallels between this and trad life and trad wife.
Yes.
Because that's, I get pretty fired up about that, but yeah.
We have a saying, Jenny, or I have a saying where I'm like, trad me harder, daddy. Secretly believe it's a kink. I'm like, I just don't think
I actually heard a sex therapist mention that, like she is, you know, she's like getting her doctorate, and she was like, I think if we could just accept that it's a kink, like that's
it's a
cool.
great kink. I'm like, take it away. Like if you really feel that, I mean, God bless you. It's just not my direct thing, but like, you know, if there's some like understanding that's sensual, try to get harder, daddy.
It's such a weird thing to see, like that shift over like over the so many years of you know, people just making sauerkraut and getting raw milk from the local farm, to this whole trad wife thing is wild. It is wild, and it's and it's not all that
that's the funny part.
Like, that's so hilarious about it. It's one of the reasons, like that whole like shift. Although I made this shift before trad wives were a thing, where I started moving away from the word traditional and toward heritage.
Yeah, I hear you say that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I noticed
It
that too.
wigged me out. you know?
Yeah. For good
Yeah,
reason.
this is an
That's one
awesome
thing we'll make
start.
it work. It is, and there's so much more to cover. Yeah, so I thank you so much for
Yeah, my pleasure.
taking the time to speak with us and
I
just be
feel like
honest.
I'm like, oh, I'm so frustrated. It's just gonna be, I like want to keep discussing this, but
Well, you
yeah.
can't undo like a good solid 20 years of this crazy insular community in an hour. You know, there's so much to look at because it's not just raw milk and cod liver oil. It's like this whole lifestyle, and it's this whole bundle of things that have been added, like an addendum to Price's work, which is now I feel like a tiny bit. And you can't even, and that's even before you start to unpack what were Price's own biases. Why
Right.
what did he choose to observe and what did he ignore? What and why would that be? Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but everybody's got them, and he certainly did too.
Yeah. And like,
Yes.
we should even discuss if we want to discuss this, but like the nail in the coffin for me was the COVID-19 pandemic, where I was
Yeah.
like, these people have just gone round the bend. Like, this is a totally different world that is
Yeah.
hard for me to, I don't know what reality they're living in, but it's not the one I'm living in. It's
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
And as somebody who I was like really questioning a lot of things that were happening at that time, I was like, this ain't it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we can come up
We'll
with
cover that
a
in part 2.